revealed the amazing truth behind 78,000 numbers that transformed our understanding of math. The storm rattled against the old windows of Ethan's classroom, each clap of thunder paralleling the turbulent thoughts churning in his mind. What was the point? No matter how hard he tried to engage his students, they just didn't care. The stony gazes of disinterested teens made him question his every attempt to bring math to life. They'd rather scroll through their phones than ponder the elegance of equations. Even his most innovative lesson plans felt like shouting into a void. "Why bother?" he whispered to himself, the faint sound drowned out by the storm outside. But that question twisted deeper than mere frustration. There was fear lurking, fear of inadequacy, of being overshadowed by a system that championed mediocrity. He questioned if he could ever ignite that spark in them. Just yesterday he overheard a student tell a friend, "Math is useless." Each dismissive comment felt like a blow, a summation of his futile efforts. What if he was fighting a battle he couldn't win? Those doubts tugged at him, pulling him into a dark abyss where hope felt like a distant memory. Sorting through the remnants of his grandmother's attic later that stormy afternoon, the oppressive weight of the storm faded into the background. Yet the tension in his chest remained. His fingers brushed against the battered trunk, curiosity piqued. Inside, chaos reigned. Faded notes, crumpled papers, and the catalog listing the 78,000 equations that once belonged to his grandfather, a man looked upon with both reverence and reproach in the mathematical community. Every piece of parchment seemed smeared with traces of a genius that lived, breathed, and agonized over the same numbers Ethan now felt alienated by. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Ethan felt a flicker of hope ignite in his chest. Could these equations, his grandfather's legacy, contain more than mere numbers? Perhaps they held the key to reaching his students in a way traditional methods had failed. Reimagining his approach, he filled the room with laughter, transformed the sterile classroom into a vibrant space of discovery. Yet disapproval echoed louder. His colleagues snickered, their judgment a palpable entity lurking behind closed doors, undermining his excitement. Doubt crept in once more. Was he a fool for stepping outside prescribed boundaries? The seas of uncertainty tossed him about as he listened to their barbed whispers, that his creativity was a threat, a disruption of long-standing tradition. Each moment spent in confrontation with skepticism quickly spiraled into internal turmoil, a battle between preserving his grandfather's passion and yielding to the suffocating norm of the educational system. And yet, as he carved out a niche for himself through after-school workshops, bringing in students once indifferent, he felt the electric spark of possibility, the growing warmth of connection. But an impending decision loomed, dark and heavy. The school board was meeting to review his position. The threat clawed at him, a monstrous hand wrapping around his throat. Would they snuff out the flame he was trying to fan? Each time he thought about facing that board, his breathing quickened, and his muscles tightened. Anxiety enveloped him, an insistent reminder of everything he stood to lose, his job, his connection with his students, his grandfather's legacy. Ethan felt a desperate pull at the core of his being, a prompting to either fight or silently wither away. As he stared into the abyss of uncertainty, he could almost hear his grandfather's voice whispering, "Sometimes the greatest transformations in life are forged through the fire of doubt." Would he allow that fire to consume him, or forge it into a beacon of hope? Time stretched before him, every choice pregnant with possibility, and his heart raced at the thought, what if the hope those 78,000 numbers represented could offer a way forward? Ethan stood at the edge of a precipice, teetering between hope and despair, his grandfather's legacy entwined with his own uncertain future. The looming specter of the school board meeting forced him to confront not just his fears, but to articulate what he believed to be true. This wasn't merely about numbers or pedagogy, it was personal. It was about proving to himself that transformation was possible, that the chaos of the equations could resonate in the hearts of young minds. Determined to approach the meeting armed with his convictions, Ethan began to chart his thoughts. Pencils danced across pages in his notebook, forming bullet points that captured his aspirations. Each idea felt like a small counterattack against the tide of skepticism that threatened to drown him. He wrote about the potential those 78,000 equations held, about how they weren't just lifeless figures from a textbook, but pathways to curiosity, creativity, and connection. There was power in storytelling, and perhaps framing those equations around real-world applications could spark interest. In showcasing their relevance, he could turn "math is useless" into an enthusiastic "look what math can do." As he prepared, the storm outside reached a crescendo, reminiscent of the turbulence in his chest. His resolve clung to the fleeting hope that he could shift perceptions in a room filled with hardened cynics. The intensity of the thunder mirrored his heartbeat, a reminder that he was not alone in this fight. The day of the meeting arrived, and Ethan walked past the familiar halls that now felt suffocating. As he pushed open the door to the conference room, he could feel the weight of expectations pressing against him. The members of the board sat impassively, their faces drawn tight with indifference or skepticism, each one a potential ally or adversary. The flicker of determination reignited in his chest. "Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present," Ethan began, his voice steady, though the anxiety threaded through his words. As he laid out his vision, the initial nods of his supporters were small victories, but others sat rigidly, their expressions shrouded in critique. With fervor, he launched into the framework of his workshops, discussing how he utilized those dusty equations to draw students in, to show how math was a living dialogue, not a static point of contention. By connecting personal stories and real-world applications, he said, we can turn our classrooms into havens of discovery instead of prisons of disillusionment. Yet doubt still snaked through the room. As he delved deeper, explaining the transformative potential of collaborative projects and interactive learning, Ethan could sense unrest among a few board members, their posture a blend of skepticism and impatience. He pushed on, sharing testimonials from students, their newfound enthusiasm illuminating the shadows where once lay complete apathy. As he wrapped up, a principal board member stood, arms crossed, a frown deepening with each passing second. "Ethan, while your enthusiasm is commendable, how can we gauge the effectiveness of your methods? The numbers don't lie, and quite frankly, our test scores speak for themselves." That statement hung in the air like fog, stifling. With each heartbeat, guilt clawed at his gut. His numbers, his progress, his passion, were they enough? He realized then that he didn't just want to prove something to them, he had to prove it to himself. Standing at the intersection of fear and possibilities, Ethan felt a shift within his spirit. As silence enveloped him, he took a breath, drawing on the essence of the equations his grandfather had left behind. What if we considered the possibility that transformation is not merely about scores on a page? What if we aimed for a deeper connection with our students? Scores can reflect understanding, but they can't gauge curiosity or creativity. With that, Ethan felt the fire in him rise, embers transforming into flames. Would the board see this vision? Could they experience the depth of his passion? The room was charged with the potential for change, and he wondered what his next move would be. He had to know. Either he would be dismissed, or perhaps they might finally see the possibilities that lay ahead. Whatever awaited him after this meeting felt like the true beginning. The moment for action had come. Ethan's heart raced as he faced the board's piercing eyes, dissecting him like a specimen on a slide. There it was, the moment of truth, crystallizing in his perspective. This was not merely a meeting, it was the battleground for his principles. The air hung thick with an unspoken agreement to be skeptical. He had seconds to tilt the balance in his favor. Perhaps it would be beneficial, he began, searching for clarity behind the fog of doubt, to explore how student engagement could be a predictive measure of academic success, not just test scores. The board's expressions were a tapestry of doubt and surprise, a flicker of interest igniting beneath the stern surface. Ethan dug deeper, attempting to dismantle their resistance. As he shared anecdotes of students who once loathed math but thrived under a collaborative learning framework, he envisioned their faces being inspired rather than drained by their schoolwork. One student told me, he continued, emboldened, that he finally understood why X mattered because he could see it working in the world around him. When we connect the content to their lives, we aren't just teaching math, we're teaching them to question, to explore. A shift occurred. Some board members leaned forward, intrigued, their initial hostility fading. Yet there was still the looming presence of the principal member, the one who held the power to sway the others. "You make emotional appeals," she interjected sharply. "But how do these changes reflect in numbers? Can these stories translate into measurable outcomes?" The challenge gripped Ethan like a vice. It was a pivotal moment, a test of his resolve and preparedness. He could either retreat into the safety of defensiveness or embrace this moment as an opportunity. Caught between the two, he inhaled deeply, allowing the tension to sharpen his focus. "I understand your concern. Transformation doesn't happen overnight. However, my workshop's success hinges on more than just immediate test scores. It's about cultivating a mindset of inquiry." As the words flowed, he tapped into the strength of his grandfather's legacy, his pulse quickening with the realization that numbers alone could never encapsulate the learning journey. Math isn't just about solving for X. It's about learning to think critically and solve problems creatively, skills that our students will carry into their futures in any field they choose. The atmosphere shifted palpably. Disbelief was being replaced by curiosity, and even the most stoic board members seemed to ponder his perspective. But there was still one critical voice echoing doubt. The principal board member stood, her arms still crossed, yet Ethan noticed a flicker of contemplation in her gaze. "Your passion is compelling, Ethan, and I admire your dedication. But how do you plan to sustain this enthusiasm? What if the novelty wears off and you're left with disinterested students again?" She had unlocked a genuine fear within him. Sustaining engagement was not merely an academic challenge. It was a matter of his identity as an educator. But it was also a discovery, one that he could wrestle with and redefine. "I plan to adapt, to solicit feedback from my students and tailor the curriculum continuously based on their needs and interests. We will learn together, create a dynamic space that evolves and thrives." There was a moment of silence, the weight of her skepticism clashing against the fervor radiating from his core. Ethan glanced around the room, gauging reactions, searching for signs of wall-breaking skepticism. He could feel hope intertwining with the shadows of doubt. Bottom line, these equations symbolize potential. Our goal isn't just to teach numbers, but to inspire resilience and creativity in our students. And there it was, a crystallization of identity. He wasn't just defending a teaching method, he was championing a philosophy, a future. The meeting, though still uncertain in its outcome, felt like a personal revolution. Ethan's voice rang with the echoes of experiences, the students, the stories, the discoveries at the precipice. For the first time, he realized the power that lay in his narrative, one that could propel his aspirations beyond the confines of that room. As Ethan finished speaking, he noticed the shift in the body language of the board members. Curiosity had taken root, coiling and expanding around doubt. If he could harness this opening. Then he heard it, the tightening sense of urgency pulling him back. "We need to assess the teaching of passion and creativity," he thought, eager and pensive. Could this be it, the bridge he needed to build? What if the board responded differently this time? What if this was just the start of an unforeseen transformation, not only in the curriculum but in the educational landscape itself? The next chapter loomed before him, filled with uncharted territory, and yet there was something more profound lurking in the shadows of his fears. Would he rise or falter as he navigated the difficult terrain ahead? Ethan exited the boardroom with his heart still pounding, the adrenaline of his presentation swirling in his veins like a venomous cocktail. He needed to take a moment. Reflections of his earlier words echoed in his mind, but the principal board member's challenge haunted him. Sustaining student engagement was not merely theoretical, it hinged on daily realities and pedagogical strategies. The shadows of doubt crept back into his mind, casting questions he could not fully shake off. He settled into his office, the walls adorned with motivational quotes and student artwork, reminders of his purpose. The chaos of the meeting had chipped away at his confidence, but now, in the solitude of his space, clarity began to take shape. First, it was about gathering data, not just anecdotes. He needed to prove that sustained engagement could be quantified alongside academic achievement. Ethan opened his laptop, fingers trembling as they hovered over the keyboard. He drafted a plan, a structured way to collect feedback from his students, committing to collaborative sessions where students could voice what engaged them, would provide essential insights. Not only would he gain valuable information, but it would also empower his students, making them feel integral to the decision-making process in their learning journey. While the thought of a research study was daunting, he felt rejuvenated at the prospect of turning his anxieties into actionable steps. No longer would he be merely an educator preaching philosophy. Instead, he could become a researcher, an innovator in pedagogical methods. This hybrid identity excited him. But were his skills enough? The cadence of self-doubt echoed. It wasn't just about implementing changes. He had to analyze the outcomes effectively. He had never considered himself particularly adept at statistical analysis or educational research methodologies. Yet wasn't this an opportunity to stretch his abilities? The thought of diving deeper into methodologies sent a shiver of apprehension through him, yet he welcomed it. Growth emerged from discomfort, he reminded himself. As the days passed, Ethan spoke with colleagues, gathered resources, and delved into books on educational research. He became fascinated with how data analysis illuminated patterns of learning engagement and success. The more he learned, the more he recognized his hidden competencies, ones buried beneath the weight of his previous doubts. He was mastering a whole new lexicon, filled with terms and concepts that began to feel empowering rather than intimidating. Amidst all this, a spark ignited within Ethan. What if he led a workshop with both students and teachers to analyze data collaboratively? A coalition for improvement could flourish, exploring trends in engagement while fostering camaraderie. Ethan envisioned group brainstorming sessions, where students crafted their learning experiences alongside their academic aspirations. Emboldened by this approach, he began drafting a proposal not just for the board, but for an immersive, interdisciplinary project. This moment wasn't merely about proving a point, it was about fostering a culture of inquiry, where both educators and students shaped the educational landscape together. Yet with this new project came hesitation. Could he trust the board to support such an expansive vision? Would they see beyond traditional metrics to recognize the value in innovation? The weight of potential rejection danced on the periphery of his mind, challenging his newfound confidence. Nevertheless, Ethan's resolve remained ironclad. He would embrace the inner turmoil as part of his transformational journey. Each step, whether forward or back, would be a testament to his unwavering belief in the power of education to inspire and connect. With heart pounding in anticipation, Ethan prepared to present his proposal, knowing it would place him at the mercy of the board's scrutiny once more. This was not just a professional test, but a personal crossroads. As he approached the next board meeting, a single thought crystallized in his mind. The time had come to face the deeper concerns that lay hidden beneath the surface. Could he transform not only his educational approach, but also the very essence of his identity as an educator? Ethan inhaled deeply as he entered the adjacent room, a space typically reserved for discordant debates and tense negotiations. The table, an imposing centerpiece, was surrounded by faces that had once felt intimidating, yet today he was armed with something potent: conviction. The anticipation of the board meeting clawed at him, but his belief in his proposal held firm. He'd prepared meticulously, poring over every statistical analysis of engagement trends he could find, wanting to merge student input with educational integrity. As the room settled, he opened with the usual pleasantries, but this time his nervousness had transformed into purpose. Speaking clearly, he introduced his proposal for a collaborative data analysis workshop, describing its impact on student engagement beyond mere numbers. His words flowed, and with each example he shared, the vision he had meticulously crafted became more vibrant in the room. He illustrated how students equipped with real data could actively influence their learning experiences. He could see the intrigue sparked in their eyes, but not everything glimmered with promise. An unspoken tension hung in the air, charging the atmosphere with skepticism. One board member, Ms. Leonard, leaned forward, her brow furrowing in apprehension. "Ethan," she interjected, cutting through the air like a knife, "while I appreciate your enthusiasm, how do we measure the efficacy of such a progressive strategy? Is there a guarantee it will yield tangible results?" This question landed heavily in Ethan's mind, echoing the very doubts that had haunted him since the last meeting. He felt the familiar shadows creeping back in, a reminder of his insecurities. He had armed himself to counter skepticism, yet her challenge flared a sense of vulnerability that threatened to derail him. "Data-driven decision-making," he began, his voice steadier than he felt, "is not about guaranteeing success in the short term. It's about cultivating an environment where students feel heard and empowered. That, in itself, drives engagement." He pressed forward, employing the academic language he had mastered, but felt the undertow of uncertainty. Despite his response, Ms. Leonard remained unconvinced. "Empowerment is crucial, but I need to see plans for assessment. How will we quantify this engagement you speak of?" she replied, her tone clinical. He paused, feeling the weight of their scrutiny. Could he rely solely on qualitative feedback? It was clear now that they wanted hard numbers, metrics that would transcend enthusiasm. Ethan understood the dilemma. The board was guarded, and in their eyes, innovation could easily be muddled with inefficiency. But a desire to stand firm overcame the rising pressure. "I plan to implement both qualitative sessions and quantitative surveys regularly. This will allow continuous feedback loops, giving us a robust basis to assess the project's impact throughout the academic year," Ethan countered, driven by a surge of determination. The room tensed, and he sensed the questions simmering beneath the surface. His proposal had ignited a discussion, yet the fiery exchange also illuminated a painful truth. What was to be gained from this if the board remained shackled to their apprehensions and traditional metrics? Ethan's heart raced as the floor opened for more queries. Another voice chimed in, "What if the students don't engage with the data? What if you can't increase those metrics at all?" Each challenge felt like an unraveling thread in his carefully crafted tapestry, unraveling the vision he desperately wanted to bring to life, forcing him into a corner he hadn't anticipated. The sheer possibility of failure weighed on him now more than ever. Could he assume success without the board's unwavering support? Their skepticism coiled around him like a vice, but he also felt himself sparring with a newfound resilience. His wavering identity as a teacher was sharpening into clarity. He clenched his fists, fighting to hold on to the conviction brewing within. He could shift the narrative. In the aftermath of the discussion, as silence swept the room, Ethan realized he had a choice to make, not just about his project, but regarding who he was evolving into as an educator amidst this turbulence. This moment could redefine not only the classroom environment, but his very identity. With determination solidifying in his chest, he straightened his posture, preparing for his closing argument. The stakes were escalating. He had prepared not just to defend a project, but to advocate for a transformation encompassing both students and himself. "However it unfolds, I owe it to my students to pursue this vision, regardless of the uncertainties," he declared, a fierce glint in his eyes. "But what I need to discover is whether this board will take that leap of faith with me or step back into the shadows of tradition." The board members exchanged glances, their expressions inscrutable, as Ethan awaited their judgment. In that charged silence, haunted by the potential for rejection, the question loomed larger. Would he have the courage to stand firm against the tide of skepticism, and what revelations might arise at this critical juncture in his journey as an educator? As the silence extended, Ethan's heart hammered like a drum within him. He could hear faint whispers of uncertainty swirling in his mind, echoing the criticisms he'd resisted during his preparation. Yet with each passing moment, he felt a strange comfort settle within the chaos. This was more than a presentation. It was a test of his professional integrity and commitment to his students. When the board finally spoke, the unexpected voice was not Ms. Leonard's but Mr. Thompson's, the chairperson renowned for his candor. "Ethan, I see promise here, but let's be pragmatic. What if the students respond negatively to the data? We need a fail-safe plan for that scenario, ensuring that we can change course should our initial assumptions falter." Assessing his options, Ethan realized that he had to provide a structure for embracing failure, a daunting task but one that aligned with the very essence of his proposal. "We must embrace the possibility of failure as part of learning," he asserted, driven by the conviction that perseverance mattered just as much as results. "My strategy will include trial metrics. Each stage will have clear objectives, and if we identify a shortcoming, we can pivot quickly without losing sight of our ultimate goal: enhanced engagement." Their gazes intensified, and as the board members scribbled notes, he felt a torrent of adrenaline surge through him, igniting a fervor that felt surprisingly liberating. It was no longer just about presenting numbers. It was about framing a new narrative, turning doubt into clarity and fear into opportunity. As discussions receded into the background noise, Ethan's mind was ablaze with potential ideas. What if, he thought, he created small focus groups where students could share their concerns and successes in real time? "I'm proposing that we engage students actively in the assessment process," he continued, "and use their voices to inform our evaluations. Through monthly reflections, we can capture qualitative data that works alongside our quantitative assessments. In this synergy, we can see real change." A flicker of intrigue sparked among the board members, yet he could still feel the undercurrents of skepticism swaying just beneath the surface. A revelation dawned. He realized he must model the vulnerability he wished for his students to adopt. If he expected them to take risks, he had to do the same. "I understand the need for metrics, but metrics, when rigidly pursued, can undermine creativity. It's critical that we remain flexible, allowing students to drive some of the data collection. After all, they must own their learning journey." Amidst the rising tide of conversation, tension briefly lifted as Mr. Thompson nodded contemplatively. "You're suggesting a framework that lets students see themselves as co-creators of their education. That's quite different." Ethan felt a wave of relief mixed with enthusiasm. He was laying down a vital cornerstone, not just clinging to his initial proposal but expanding it further, breathing life into his vision. However, lurking doubt still tempted him like an uninvited shadow, questioning whether he could effectively orchestrate this newfound complexity. Could he empower students effectively while maintaining structure? Before he could ponder deep enough to drown in analytics, Ms. Leonard's voice sliced through the air, demanding clarity once again. "And when data speaks against your expectations, what are you prepared to do then? Would you reconsider your approach, or would you double down on your strategies even in the face of poor engagement?" The question hung thick, prompting silent deliberation and urging Ethan to confront how he would manage disappointment. This was no longer just a query. It resonated with his insecurities. Was he willing to bet his professional reputation on a gamble that might implode? "I believe that adaptability stems from a commitment to grow, especially when faced with challenges," Ethan replied, feeling a newfound resolve. "Should the data indicate failure, I would not retreat. Instead, I would analyze and shift my approach collaboratively with the students, learning from the setbacks to reforge our path forward." The measure of Ethan's resolve wrapped around him like an armor, fierce and self-assured. He glanced around the boardroom, absorbing their reactions, curiosity, skepticism, and perhaps even recognition of the risk he was embracing. The bubbling atmosphere transformed around him. It was no longer a negotiation. It had mutated into a dialogic synergy. A decision loomed ahead of him, vivid and clear, whether to remain tethered to insecurity or to boldly move forward into uncharted territories. With the air thick with unresolved tension, Ethan sensed that this pivotal moment would redefine his role as an educator. As the meeting drew to a close, he braced himself for their final decision about his proposal. The weight of ambition, apprehension, and hope converged sharply within him, leaving him with just one overwhelming thought. What if this was his moment to redefine not just benchmarks, but the entire educational experience? Drawing a deep breath, Ethan locked eyes with Mr. Thompson, ready to confront whatever conclusion awaited him. Would they recognize the potential he saw, or would he be left stewing in the soft stings of disappointment, pushed back into the expectations of the past? The question lurked, vibrant as ever, as the board members began to gather for a final consultation. Would this moment break him or shape him into the educator he was always meant to be? The board congregated quietly, murmurs punctuating the tense atmosphere. Ethan could feel the weight of their gazes, each eyes scrutinizing him with an intensity that seemed to strip him bare. Adrenaline still buzzed through his veins, tightening his chest as he prepared for their final pronouncement. He glanced at Mr. Thompson, whose furrowed brow hinted at battling inner deliberations. Could he be swayed by Ethan's impassioned argument, or would pragmatism prevail to stifle innovation? The decision hovered like a specter over the room, amplifying his sense of urgency. Ethan's mind spiraled through countless possibilities, each scenario more disheartening than the last. What would happen if the board rejected his vision? Would he return to the mundane metrics that perpetuated disinterest among his students? He steeled himself against the onslaught of insecurity and forced his focus on the students, the real reason he was fighting. Their potential echoed in his mind, and the very thought ignited a flicker of determination. After what felt like an eternity, the board chair leaned forward, the weight of silence shattering as he finally spoke. "Ethan, let's dissect your proposal further. You've demonstrated a passionate commitment to student engagement, a philosophy that resonates with our current educational goals. However, how do you see your accessible strategies translating into actionable feedback for the students?" The question bore down heavily, presenting both a challenge and an opportunity. Grasping the lifeline, Ethan responded, "I envision a dynamic feedback loop, one where students receive ongoing constructive critiques. We can integrate self-assessments and peer evaluations, allowing them to reflect on their learning journeys while providing direct input on the curriculum's adaptability." Nods of agreement punctuated his words, fueling his confidence. Each affirmation further deepened the resolve that had blossomed during his presentation. For the first time, Ethan keenly recognized the power of communication. Articulating a vision was pivotal, but fostering dialogue could transform ambition into tangible results. He wondered how many educators like himself felt the chasm between desire and execution. Yet doubts remained coiled tightly within him, ready to spring at the slightest provocation. As he dissected his strategies, he realized that embracing vulnerability extended beyond his students. It also required transparency with his colleagues. If we foster a culture where everyone feels safe to share their insights, we can create an environment of collective growth. Students will learn more when they see their educators adapting and learning alongside them. This admission wove itself into the fabric of his proposal, transforming it from merely an initiative to a movement. He brainstormed potential scenarios for how educators could reflect on their teaching methods, modeling the same vulnerability he sought to instill in students. How could they create a ripple effect of inspiration? Mr. Thompson interjected again, this time testing Ethan's mettle. "And if this innovation fails, what safeguards will you take to secure your position?" Ethan hesitated but felt an unwavering clarity wash over him. "If this fails," he declared, "it will not be a reflection of my worth, but a stepping stone to evolve our educational practices. Each misstep presents a valuable opportunity to recalibrate and strengthen our approaches." He could see their guarded expressions begin to thaw, the acknowledgement that he was ready to embrace failure as a vital component of learning echoed in the room. The intensity of their scrutiny lessened, replaced by an eagerness to explore further. Yet, as optimism flickered, Ethan felt the vestiges of self-doubt clawing at the edges of his mind. Would his colleagues genuinely rally behind this vision, or would trepidation persist? Were they truly ready to shift the paradigms of assessment? Minutes later, the deliberation concluded. The board members shared glances, a sacred language of unspoken agreement and skepticism. It was time to unveil their verdict. Amidst the tension, Ethan's heart raced as Mr. Thompson cleared his throat once again. Ethan, in light of your proposition, we believe your approach has merit worth exploring. However, you must know, the real challenge begins now. The words struck Ethan like a bell tolling the start of a race, igniting a surge of apprehension and excitement in equal measure. But as he absorbed the response, another notion crystallized in his mind. Perhaps the greatest hurdle would come not from the board, but from himself. Would he rise to lead this transformative vision? Would his instincts serve him well, or would he falter when faced with real-world implementation? As he faced the board again, the enormity of the task settled around him like an intoxicating fog, cloaked in both possibility and the fear of failure. This was not merely an opportunity, it was a defining moment, where the person he was could evolve into the educator he aspired to be. And as each board member prepared to depart, anticipation grew in Ethan, a nagging premonition that this was just the precipice of something far greater. What awaited him as he injected this new methodology into the classroom would surely demand every iota of his resolve and creativity. Would his lesson plans adapt effectively under pressure, or would he find himself caught in the confines of his previous rigidity? Ethan emerged from the boardroom with a mix of exhilarating triumph and crippling anxiety. He had passed the first test, but the reality of implementation loomed ominously on the horizon. The prospect of translating his ambitious proposal into a functioning classroom. Reality threatened to engulf him in uncertainty. Each step he took toward his classroom felt weighted by the gravity of expectation. He could almost hear the echoes of the board's deliberations in his mind. Back in his classroom, the familiar clutter of textbooks and student projects greeted him, yet the atmosphere felt markedly different. The walls that had previously felt like boundaries now seemed to press in around him, challenging his resolve. He was faced with remnants of his traditional teaching methods clashing against the new dynamic he hoped to inspire. How would he navigate the tumultuous waters of divergence from the norm? Ethan's first instinct was to retreat to the comfort of his established lesson plans, but he knew that complacency would undermine the very innovation he championed. He dropped into his chair, running a hand through his hair, and stared at his whiteboard, an empty canvas awaiting fresh ideas. Would his colleagues join him on this journey, or would he be left to pursue a solitary path riddled with obstacles? He pondered the realities of transparency he had previously championed. It became glaringly clear that if he expected his students to share their insights, he must lead by example. But would vulnerability resonate with his colleagues who had long adhered to conventional methods? Suddenly, the thought of approaching them filled him with dread. Their potential resistance loomed as a specter, insisting he contend with both external and internal battles. Gathering his thoughts into a semblance of coherence, Ethan began to sketch a new lesson plan. He envisioned a classroom that encouraged attraction toward intrinsic motivation, a lively exchange rather than a monotonous discourse. Building a curriculum around self-assessments held the promise of fostering peer dialogue and engagement. Nevertheless, doubts crept back in with each stroke of his marker. He questioned whether he had the skills to implement these radical changes effectively. Suddenly, a flash of inspiration struck. What if he opened the floor, inviting his colleagues into his planning sessions? He could present his ideas and solicit their feedback, transforming the development of his vision into a collective effort. The prospect thrilled him and terrified him in equal measure. The uncertainty of their responses loomed large. Would they embrace the potential for change or ridicule what they deemed a foolish gamble? Fueled by a surge of resolve, Ethan drafted an email to his colleagues, outlining his intentions and inviting them to contribute to the evolution of the classroom experience. With a deep breath, he hit send, as if launching a small ship into a tempestuous sea. Would they take the bait, or would he find himself alone on the tumultuous voyage? The clock ticked ominously as he awaited responses. Each minute stretched painfully, amplifying his rumination about their potential skepticism. As educators, they had been molded by tradition, unearthed by trials and failures. Yet what he didn't know about himself began to surface. An unsettling curiosity fed by the notion of daring to venture into the unknown. Perhaps in this shared endeavor, he might uncover hidden talents and allies he had been blind to before. Just then his computer chimed with incoming replies. He hesitated, heart racing as he clicked through the messages. Some offered enthusiastic support, eager to engage and collaborate, while others were fraught with skepticism. The mixed responses weighed heavily on him. Was he truly prepared to lead this charge? As the chatter of the classroom grew around him, Ethan felt a shift within. He realized he wouldn't just be teaching his students. He was teaching himself, learning to embrace collaboration and navigate conflict. The path might be chaotically unsettling, but it blossomed with possibility. But as he steeled himself for the upcoming discussions with colleagues, he also sensed an unexpected tension building within. Could he genuinely manage the breadth of opinions? Would he be able to balance a collaborative effort while standing firm in his convictions? Determination surged within him, yet unanswered questions gnawed at his core. The revelation that he might soon find himself critically confronting doubt and resilience left him on edge, treading the fine line between failure and the emergence of a revolutionary teaching philosophy. As the school day drew to a close, Ethan felt the weight of expectations settle into a sort of quiet resolve. He was on the cusp of discovering not only how to innovate, but also what it truly meant to be an educator willing to evolve. And at that moment, as he prepared for the meetings that lay ahead, a singular thought crystallized. The time had come to face his fears and champion the unknown. How far would he go to lead, and what sacrifices would he be willing to make to ensure his vision took flight? As the morning sun filtered through the classroom windows, Ethan's heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Today marked the first of what he hoped would be a series of collaborative meetings with his colleagues, a chance to animate his vision and garner support. With each passing moment, he mulled over the implications of what lay ahead, not simply for his teaching methods, but for his professional identity. He entered the room early, arranging chairs into a loose circle, a subtle nod to inclusivity. The space, usually rigid in its assembly of desks and chairs, felt more inviting with this approach. Yet the shadow of his insecurities crept in. What if they saw right through him? What if his enthusiasm came across as naivety? Each breath he took filled him with both resolve and uncertainty. As colleagues strolled in, exchanging nervous glances, Ethan greeted them with a forced smile, masking an inner turmoil. The anxiety writhed within him, nudging him towards snippets of self-doubt. But as they seated themselves, he reminded himself, this was not merely about him. It was about creating an environment where students thrived. With that thought anchoring him, he cleared his throat and began. Thank you all for coming. What I'm envisioning is not just a shift in lesson plans, but a fundamental change in how we engage with our students, Ethan stated, attempting to assert confidence with his tone. Feedback came at him in waves, some enthusiastic, others tinged with skepticism. One veteran educator, Ms. Mitchell, crossed her arms, leaning back. Ethan, innovation is great, but we have curriculum to follow. Have you considered the implications of deviating from what's worked for years? A knot tightened in his stomach. He respected her experience, but felt the familiar urge to defend his ideas. Instead, a brief silence enveloped the room, a moment for reflection. Challenging resilience arose within him, born from a newfound understanding. Conflict could be a catalyst for growth, not just for him, but for the entire team. I understand the concerns, Ms. Mitchell. However, if we continue to teach in the same ways, are we really preparing our students for the future? The words flowed more easily now, and he sensed a shift in the atmosphere. What if we rerouted our focus from grades to deeper understanding? A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. He could see some colleagues nodding, their expressions less guarded. This realization bolstered his confidence. The exchange had a life of its own, illuminating his own capacity to influence and lead. As discussions rolled into different ideas and possibilities, Ethan glanced around the circle and realized that he was not alone in this journey. He had created a space for collaborative reflection, allowing different viewpoints to coalesce into a genuine dialogue. In this moment, he began to appreciate the power of collective intelligence, a resource he'd previously overlooked. Yet even amidst this blooming optimism, he grappled with an underlying tension. Was he truly equipped to manage these different perspectives? Could he keep the momentum alive in the face of potential backlash? Internal conflicts raced as each new idea emerged. He felt both exhilaration and the weight of responsibility. As the meeting drew to a close, Ethan felt energized by the conversations, but uncertainty lingered. Roadblocks inevitably awaited, and the more he learned, the more he questioned his capacities. Would he crack under the weight of opposition? As the colleagues began to leave, Ms. Mitchell approached him one last time. "I can see your passion, Ethan," she said, her tone softening, "but you need to remain grounded. Don't let idealism cloud your judgment as you move forward." Her words resonated as an unanticipated challenge. Could he keep his ideals while ensuring practicality? He nodded, thankful for her insight, yet her skepticism resonated deeply. With the classroom returning to its usual state, Ethan sat at his desk reflecting on the conversations and their implications. Growth came with discomfort, but could he navigate this tightrope with grace? The prospect of a real transformation hung tantalizingly close, yet its realization seemed fraught with risks. Just as he closed his planning documents, a single thought haunted him. What would happen if he pushed too hard or faced outright resistance? The path ahead appeared thorny, with discovery lurking in each shadow, and he felt on the precipice of growth. As he prepared for the next steps, Ethan's internal mantra spun in his mind. To lead, one must confront fear fearlessly. The moment to affirm his resolve was drawing near, and with it came a question that promised to ignite his journey further. What sacrifices was he willing to make to ensure his classroom vision blossomed into a reality? Ethan stood before his classroom, the walls now adorned with vibrant student projects reflecting the diverse ideas that had taken root over the past few months. There was a notable shift in energy. His students buzzed with a newfound curiosity, one born from the transformative approach he had envisioned with his colleagues. After engaging in extensive meetings, all that groundwork now bore fruit, and the ripple effects were unmistakable. He had conquered not just the challenge of reinvigorating math, but had also begun to reshape his identity as an educator. Gone were the days when he felt the stony glares of disengaged pupils. Now those same faces lit up with enthusiasm at the exploration of concepts previously deemed dull. The freedom to deviate from traditional methods provided a fresh canvas on which the artistry of learning flourished. Assessments had transformed into insightful discussions. The classroom became a laboratory of ideas rather than a mere vessel for rote memorization. Ethically collecting and analyzing feedback from his students allowed him to attune his teaching methods, demonstrating the powerful symbiotic relationship between engagement and academic achievement. As the semester progressed, the board eagerly awaited outcome metrics. Ethan had articulated not just qualitative insights, but quantitative data too, a pivot that both fortified his confidence and silenced lingering doubts. His once overwhelming insecurities had metamorphosed into a solid recognition of competence. One breezy afternoon, as the students collaborated on a project assessing real-world applications of mathematical theories, Ethan recalled the raw fear he once felt about stepping away from convention. The path had not been without struggles. He faced skepticism from some colleagues, but he transformed each challenge into an opportunity for dialogue, cultivating a sense of community that transcended individual narratives. Each student's success story became a tangible symbol of achievement, solidifying his perspective that classrooms ought to foster curiosity. The radiant testimonials from students echoed in his mind. Math isn't useless, I can see it everywhere. Such declarations felt like an anthem, a vindication of his resolve to forge a new path. To culminate this journey, the school district held an educational showcase day inviting parents, faculty, and board members to witness the student outcomes firsthand. As everyone gathered, Ethan approached the podium, heart racing with a mixture of excitement and anticipation. This was his moment to lay bare the success not just of the students, but of the pedagogical transformation he had spearheaded. PowerPoint slides flipped, illustrating a variety of projects replete with student reflections, engagement metrics, and even data showing increased test scores. Today, he began, voice steady, we are celebrating a shift. What you see here is not just the outcome of innovative teaching, but the manifestation of curiosity and creativity in our students. This wasn't done alone. This was a collective effort, a testament to collaboration, adaptability, and the belief that learning could be an experience of discovery rather than obligation. Proud cheers erupted from parents and students alike, echoing what had once felt impossible. External validation, the excitement of the crowd, and a palpable sense of achievement reinforced his stature in the educational landscape. In this environment, Ethan finally grasped his unique potential as not just an educator, but as a leader driving meaningful change. The board's formal acknowledgement followed, where commendations echoed through the air. Mr. Thompson, rising amidst the claps and cheers, remarked, "Ethan, your commitment to blending tradition with innovation has produced remarkable results. We look forward to expanding this model across all classrooms." At that moment, as applause rang out, Ethan felt a profound satisfaction settle deep in his core. He wasn't just recognized for his teaching methods. He had proven to himself what was possible when passion met perseverance. He had transitioned from a teacher burdened by fear and doubt to one celebrated for inspiring a generation, a solid anchor in the educational community. This journey had forged an indelible mark upon him, sculpting not just his career trajectory, but his identity. His once trepidation had transformed into resilience, and now, as he stood among the faces of those he inspired, he realized that the numbers, in essence, the very chaos he had unearthed, were simply pathways leading to connection. And in that moment, he understood every doubt he had faced would always be the embers leading to brighter futures, not just for him, but for each student. Ethan had not merely conquered a challenge, he had achieved profound personal and professional growth. As parents beamed at their children, one thought amplified through his being: transformation was the bridge to possibility. Now, more than ever, it was time for those who resonated with this journey to take action. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment their reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share.